Hello, book burners, and welcome to another episode of Books Are Burning. I'm your host, Mark Will, author, songwriter, and publisher in permanent exile, currently based on the island of Taiwan. It's been a while, has it not? Welcome back. Today we will be discussing Immanuel Kant's Perpetual Peace, a philosophical sketch. Those of you watching can see that the edition I'll be talking about is this very slender volume here. It's really more of a pamphlet or essay than a philosophical tome. As the title says, it's a sketch. So let's get into it. Here is our man Immanuel Kant, 1724 to 1804. So he's a German Enlightenment philosopher, flourished in the 18th century. And this book, which in German is called Zum ewigen Frieden, ein philosophischer Entwurf, was published in 1795. So, it's after the American Revolution, after the French Revolution, all of these ideas of the proper form of government and issues of war and peace are in the air, as it were. So Kant decides to apply himself to this topic as well. The edition we're considering today is translated by Ted Humphrey. That's from 2003. Now, from the intro, it says, Perpetual Peace is the last of Kant's Enlightenment essays dealing with history, human progress, the foundations of political association, and the relation between moral and prudential principles. So he wrote it late in life. I guess we have the benefit of his many years of study and reflection. It's the product of his mature wisdom, let's hope. Now, in the intro, he mentions that the book may have been inspired by a sign that he saw at a Dutch innkeeper's inn or tavern. There was a picture of a graveyard, and the Dutch phrase is "naar de eeuwige vrede." So, perpetual peace is conceived of as a graveyard. There's what JFK called the peace of the grave. It's because of this, satirical reference that people like Hannah Arendt thought the entire essay, Kant's To Perpetual Peace, was itself satire. But let's assume that we're meant to take it seriously. Let's take Kant at his word and see if we can learn anything about perpetual peace. And let's ask ourselves also, are the nations of the world trying to achieve perpetual peace? Are we living up to these preliminary articles that we will look at today? How are we doing with all of this? Let's see. The first section of the book, which will be our focus today, is the preliminary articles for perpetual peace among nations, and there are 6 of these. In another episode, we'll deal with the remaining portions of the book or pamphlet. So today, Section 1, Preliminary Articles for Perpetual Peace Among Nations. Number 1, this is Article number 1. No treaty of peace that tacitly reserves issues for a future war shall be held valid. So remember, we want to achieve perpetual peace among nations. We want a world of peace, not a world of war. How do we achieve it? According to Kant, the first preliminary article is this: no treaty of peace that tacitly reserves issues for a future war shall be held valid. Well, what does that remind us of? He clarifies by saying a mere truce, a suspension of hostilities, is not equivalent to peace, which means the end of hostilities, the end of all hostilities, rather. So if there are unresolved issues when you make peace, or let's say have a ceasefire, it's not going to be permanent. This is not perpetual peace that's going to be achieved. So let's say, for example, you've got an occupation that hasn't been dealt with, or ethnic cleansing, or an apartheid state. One group of people oppressing another, and they make a truce. It's not going to last. There will always be conflict between these two peoples because the underlying issues have not been resolved. If you want to have perpetual peace, you must resolve all of the issues. You don't reserve them for a future conflict. In other words, if you're not making peace in good faith, it's not going to last. So I'm also reminded of the Treaty of Versailles, which was thought by many. This ended World War I, of course, and it was thought by many to be the basis for World War II, because the Treaty of Versailles was so unfair to the Germans. It sowed the seeds for future conflict. Many issues were left unresolved, and so it was a peace which merely represented a temporary cessation of hostilities, but would lead to a future war. This is also called a Carthaginian peace because it's the kind of peace that the Romans imposed on Carthage. It was such a brutal peace, such a unfair negotiation or settlement of the conflict that, of course, it was going to lead to a future conflict. Okay, so if you're going to negotiate peace, you need to do so in good faith, and you need to deal with all the issues. Don't reserve them for future conflicts, because otherwise you won't have perpetual peace. It'll just be a temporary peace. All right, let's look at number 2 now. Preliminary article number 2 says no independent nation, be it large or small, may be acquired by another nation by inheritance, exchange, purchase, or gift. That's interesting. No nation may be purchased by another. Well, immediately, first of all, why? He explains that because, like a tree, each nation has its own roots. That's an interesting image. But, of course, the mention of the word purchase makes me think of the Louisiana Purchase, which you'll recall was what the United States, the land that the United States purchased from France. And of course, this would lead to conflicts because you had one nation selling the land of other people to a third nation, kind of like what Arthur Kessler said about the Balfour Declaration. It was one nation solemnly promising to a second nation the country and land of a third. You can't do that. You can't sell or give or acquire someone else's land or country. Now, in the case of the Louisiana Purchase, if you those of you watching can see the map here, you've got, you know, territory which is now modern day the modern day states of Texas, or parts thereof: Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Missouri, Kansas, Colorado, Nebraska, Iowa, what is that? Wyoming, South Dakota, North Dakota, Montana, parts of Minnesota. I mean, all of this land. Oh, and it even went up into part of Canada, apparently. I'm not sure how that ended up being returned to Canada. But anyway, France sells all of this land, which is inhabited by Native Americans, American Indians, uh, who I'm sure were not consulted about the sale or the purchase of their land. So, one colonial power sells to another this land which neither has a title to. So, of course, that's going to lead to conflict. And, in the case of the history of the United States, led to ethnic cleansing, genocide, and removal of the indigenous people to uh, reservations, those that weren't killed. So this kind of purchasing of a nation, I mean, maybe they weren't nations in the Kantian sense of the Staat. This is the German word Staat. It's like nation state. So they weren't, nation states in the European sense, perhaps, but they were uh, nations in the Native American sense. They were indigenous peoples who occupied that land. So it wasn't France's to sell, and it wasn't the United States to buy. So, of course, that's going to lead to conflict. That's not the way to lay the groundwork for peace. So, Article number 2, we see how uh, nations have failed to follow Kant's advice and live up to the precepts that he laid out. Now, I'm also reminded of Sykes-Picot. At the end of World War One, the Ottoman Empire is defeated and is then carved up by European colonial powers, mostly France and Britain, but also Russia. And basically you've got these diplomats from these colonial powers. Again, Sykes-Picot, these are British and French diplomats, but as I say, Russia was involved too, and they got a peace. I think they got Armenia, according to this map here, that you can see if you're watching the video version of this lovely podcast. But this was not France's and England's and Russia's to have. There were people living there, and they the colonial powers had no right, had no authority to claim that for themselves and then draw these arbitrary lines and say, okay, these are the new countries. And of course, the effects are still with us today. The Middle East is a very troubled region. I see, Palestine here on this map as well, and it was right in the middle of that. So more than a century later, we're still dealing with the fallout from that because this preliminary article number 2 was not adhered to, not followed. You had nations thinking that they could just acquire, possess, um, inherit, as it were, other people's nations. So, of course, that's going to lead to conflict. It's going to lead to war. Going to lead to all kinds of problems, and it will not establish perpetual peace, which is our goal. Here's an interesting one. Number 3, standing armies shall be gradually abolished. Well, how's that working out for us? There's some interesting quotes in this section. Kant says, standing armies are the cause of wars of aggression that are intended to end burdensome expenditures. Yeah, if you spend all this money on an army, eventually you're going to want to use it. And we've seen that play out in many frightening ways in the past century, I would say. Another interesting quote here, paying men to kill or be killed appears to use them as mere machines and tools in the hand of another, the nation, which is inconsistent with the rights of humanity. Very bold statement, very interesting. I wonder how many people would subscribe to that now. How many people even know that this German Enlightenment philosopher that is, so hallowed and respected and so canonical, how many people know that he wrote that? Basically, he's saying, this is immoral to have a standing army where you're paying men to kill or be killed. You're using them as machines and tools. Here's a picture of the of an ad for the so-called regular army. That is the standing army of the United States. It says soldier's life. Uncle Sam wants you. All right, and those of you watching can see this graph here. It shows active and reserve U.S. military force personnel in 2021. This is from the Department of Defense. I didn't add up all the numbers, but you've got several different branches of the service. You've got the Army active duty, Navy active duty, Army National Guard, Air Force active duty, Army Reserve, Marine Corps active duty, Air National Guard, Air Force Reserve, Navy Reserve, Marine Corps Reserve, and look at that, we've got Space Force active duty as well. I didn't add up all these numbers, but it looks like, about 2 million service personnel. So the United States is certainly very far from abolishing its standing army. I mean, it's hard to even imagine such a thing happening at this time. But according to Kant, that is exactly what we need to do if we want perpetual peace. And I don't know if these service personnel are all stateside. I rather doubt this is the worldwide force, but I don't know. I mean, remember there are a lot of, and we'll see this later. There are a lot of U.S. bases around the world, and there are also some black sites that are not even on the books. So we're very far from achieving that, and the United States, of course, is certainly one of the worst offenders. Some other interesting quotes from this section. Kant says, the power of money is the most reliable instrument of war. And the hoarding of treasure could be regarded as preparation for war that necessitates aggression. I'm reminded of a couple of song lyrics. Name that tune. This is the golden age, and gold is the reason for the wars we wage. You know that song? Let me know in the comments. How about this one? With, without. And who'll deny it's what the fighting's all about? Truer words were never spoken or sung. All right, moving on. Preliminary article number 4 says no national debt shall be contracted in connection with the foreign affairs of the nation. Well, again, let's look at what's going on with the United States of America. Here is a graphic showing foreign holders of U.S. debt. It looks like Japan holds most of the U.S. debt. So, I mean, this is debt, and it's related to foreign affairs because foreign governments are holding this debt. Looks like Japan holds most of it. China holds quite a bit of it. Um, many other countries throughout the world hold that U.S. debt. Not good if perpetual peace is your goal. These, being indebted to foreign nations can sow the seeds for future conflict. And what is all of that debt going towards? I mean, why is the U.S. so much in debt? What is it spending all its money on, this U.S. government? Well, a good deal of it is spent on military buildup. This graphic here from the Peter J. Peterson Foundation says the United States spends more on defense than the next 10 countries combined. This is from 2023. It says 877 billion is what the U.S. spends. And the other 10 nations combined, that's China, Russia, India, Saudi Arabia, the UK, Germany, France, South Korea, Japan, and our friend Ukraine, spend a combined total of 849 billion, according to this. So, again, if your goal is perpetual peace, this is not the way to achieve it. Lavish military expenditures and then going into debt and being indebted to foreign nations. Not a good combination. I thought this was cute. Kant, good German that he is, mentions the credit system, which he calls the ingenious invention of a commercial people. And of course, he means the British people. He means this facetiously. Of course, he was not a fan of the credit system and the debt which that would necessitate. All right, moving on to preliminary article number 5. No nation shall forcibly interfere with the constitution and government of another. Wow. How are we doing with this one? Well, here's a map of the globe. Those of you watching can see the blue sections. This is a map of the entire Earth, right? So the blue sections show all of the countries where there are U.S. military bases. So you've got all of North America, a good part of South America, Australia, New Zealand, parts of East Asia, the Middle East, all over Europe, Africa. When you put a base in another country, you are clearly interfering with the government of that country. Now they would say, oh no, it's a jobs program. We're welcome here. Well, I don't think the people of Okinawa, for example, would agree with that. They've been petitioning to have the U.S. bases removed from their islands for, from their island, I should say, for decades. Ever since, ever since it was there, it was put there. The U.S. military presence was there. There's been a strong contingent of people wanting them to leave, but it's not happening. So if that's not interference, I don't know what is. And if that doesn't convince you, here's a map from William Bloom's. Well, it's based on his Killing Hope and Rogue State. I've got Rogue State here in my library, and I'll be discussing that in a future episode of Books Are Burning. But it's great. It's a catalog of U.S. The crimes of U.S. imperialism. I mean, in this map here, those of you watching can see the red parts show targeted countries. The black explosions show U.S. bombings, and these black lines show U.S. government assassination plots. Well, countries have been targeted for coups, countries have been overthrown, leaders have been assassinated. So by the U.S. and the CIA, this map is U.S. military and CIA interventions since World War II. So it's just, one after another. If you read William Bloom's Rogue State, you'll see all of the countries where the U.S. intervened in the affairs of other nations. So, of course, that's going to lead to conflict, war. There's never going to be peace so long as you have a CIA engaging in these activities, using spies, using assassination, subterfuge, cooing people, overthrowing governments. Of course, that's going to lead to conflict and peace, which in turn powers the military-industrial complex, which, President Eisenhower warned the U.S. people about after basically building it up himself and empowering the Dulles brothers to work their mayhem throughout the world. But at least he made a statement about it at the end. I guess that was better than nothing. So, how are we doing with these 6 preliminary articles? Does the world seem to want peace? Doesn't seem like it. Here we go. Number 6. No nation at war with another shall permit such acts of war as shall make mutual trust impossible during some future time of peace. Such acts include the use of assassins, poisoners, breach of surrender, instigation of treason in the opposing nation, etc. And we just talked about that. I mean, CIA interference in the internal affairs of other nations. The very existence of the CIA is a violation of this preliminary article. All of these things Kant calls dishonorable stratagems, which is a great phrase. And these dishonorable stratagems lead to a war of extermination, which would permit perpetual peace to occur only in the vast graveyard of humanity as a whole. So again, there's JFK's peace of the grave. That's not what we want. We want a real living peace, a peace for, humanity as it exists now in the world, alive and kicking, not dead. So these dishonorable stratagems must be absolutely prohibited, says Kant, because such activities will also carry over to peacetime and will thus undermine it. And of course, that's exactly what happened. The Office of Special, the OSS, Office of Special Services, which was the forerunner of the CIA. That was founded during World War II, and they engaged in all of these dishonorable stratagems, and then it never went away. It did carry over to peacetime, and thus has undermined peace, absolutely, since that very time to the present day. Here's a picture. Those of you watching can see it's this person who seems to be straining at his stool is Pompeo Maximus, the villainous Mike Pompeo, who openly admitted, we lied, we cheated, we stole. Former CIA guy, and then worked his way into the Trump administration, and convinced Trump to, well, first he tried to convince him to assassinate Julian Assange. That didn't happen, fortunately, but he did succeed at assassinating this figure here, Qasem Soleimani, the number 2 guy in Iran. Foolish, outrageous, criminal, a war crime. Fortunately, that didn't lead to a war with Iran, but certainly didn't help matters. And of course, there's a long history of this. We referred before to William Bloom's book, which catalogs all of these, coups and attempts to overthrow other governments, but also the long list of assassinations. Soleimani is one of the more recent examples, but you can go back to, well, they tried to assassinate Castro. Of course, they assassinated Patrice Lumumba in, I want to say, 1960. It was like, or maybe it was early 61. It was just before Kennedy came into office. Alan Dulles and his band of criminals knew that JFK was sympathetic to Lumumba and was supportive of, African nationalist movements. So they made sure to kill Lumumba before Kennedy took power. And those of you watching can see this is a fantastic hat that he's wearing. Leopard skin pillbox hat with some kind of feather. That is amazing. I would love to have a hat like that. But yeah, one of the many examples of foreign leaders couped, undermined, assassinated by the U.S., usually CIA. Che Guevara, there's another example. All right. At the end of this section, there's a little coda, I guess you could say. And I thought this quote was relevant. Kant says, delay is permitted. He's talking about the implementation of the preliminary articles here. Delay is permitted only to prevent such premature implementation as might injure the intention of the article. Well, in the case of these 6, there's been, an unnecessary delay to implement all of them. There's no attempt to implement them at all. So we've delayed far too long. But that's just my take on it. What do you think? Does the world want perpetual peace? Is that something that is even desirable? Or do too many people benefit from war and conflict? What do you think? All right, well, we'll pick up here on the next episode. We will consider the second section, which includes definitive articles for perpetual peace among nations. So today we talked about the preliminary articles. Next time we'll look at those definitive articles. Thanks for your attention. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and all of that. And we'll see you next time on Books Are Burning.